The iconic Capitoline wolf statue depicts a she-wolf nursing the twins Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome. According to myth, the twins were the sons of Mars and a Latin princess, left to die but saved by a wolf on the banks of the Tiber River. As young men, they overthrew a wicked king, and after a quarrel, Romulus killed Remus and founded the city of Rome in 753 BC, traditionally April 21st. Romulus became Rome's first king, giving his name to the city. Though this foundation legend is shrouded in myth, the tale of the wolf and twins has endured as a symbol of Rome's origins and resilience through the ages. Chapter 1. The Age of Kings, Rome's early foundation. In its earliest years, Rome was ruled by kings. Romulus was said to be the first in a line of 7 kings of Rome. Some were legendary lawgivers, like Numa Pompilius, who established religious customs, and others warlike conquerors. The city grew from a small settlement of huts on the Palatine Hill to a fledgling city-state under these monarchs. The last king, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, was a tyrant whose oppressive rule would prove intolerable. The turning point came when Tarquin's son Sextus outrageously violated a noblewoman named Lucretia, driving her to despair. Lucretia's tragic fate spurred an uprising in 509 BC, led by her kinsman Lucius Junius Brutus, rallying the outraged Romans to expel the Tarquin royal family. This revolution ended the 244-year monarchy and gave birth to the Roman Republic. Never again, vowed the Romans, would one man be king in Rome. The people instituted a new system in which 2 consuls were elected annually as joint heads of state, sharing power to prevent tyranny. A senate of aristocrats would advise the consuls, and various popular assemblies gave citizens a voice. Thus, from the ashes of monarchy arose a fledgling republic, a novel experiment in mixed governance that would shape Rome's destiny for centuries. The proud legend of Brutus leading the expulsion of the kings became a cornerstone of Roman identity, symbolizing their hatred of tyranny and love of liberty. View of the ruins of the Roman Forum in the heart of Rome, which in antiquity was the bustling civic center of the Republic. It was here, according to tradition, that Brutus and the Roman nobles swore never to have a king again, establishing a republic in 509 BC. In the Forum's meeting spaces and temples, the early Romans forged the institutions, the Senate, the assemblies, the consuls, that would guide Rome's destiny for the next 500 years. With the monarchy gone, early Republican Rome faced immediate challenges. The fledgling republic had to defend itself against hostile neighbors. Deposed King Tarquin enlisted Etruscan cities to attack Rome, and wars with the Etruscans and Latin towns ensued. The Romans, led by Brutus and other patriots, heroically fended off attempts to restore the Tarquins. In one famous tale, as Etruscan armies approached, a lone hero named Horatius Cocles held off the enemy at a bridge, saving the city. Another legend tells of Cloelia, a brave Roman girl who escaped Etruscan captivity and swam across the Tiber under a hail of spears. These stories, half history, half legend, instilled Roman values of courage and sacrifice for freedom. Throughout the 5th century BC, Rome slowly expanded its territory in Latium, the region around the city. The young republic was not without internal strife. Commoners, plebeians, struggled for political rights against the patrician aristocracy. In 494 BC, amid war and debt crises, the plebeians famously seceded to the Sacred Mount until they won the creation of the tribune of the plebs, an official elected to protect common citizens' interests. Over time, the conflict of the orders, as this social struggle was called, led to important reforms, including the written law of the 12 Tables around 450 BC, which for the first time set down Rome's laws in writing for all to know. These early challenges molded Rome into a more resilient republic, with a broader base of citizen participation and the rule of law. Chapter 2. Trials of the Early Republic. Survival and conquest of Italy. By the early 4th century BC, Rome had established itself as one of several Italian powers. But a grave threat arrived in 390 BC, when roving bands of Gauls, Celtic warriors from the north, swept down into Italy. The Romans met them in battle at the Allia River and suffered a catastrophic defeat. The victorious Gauls, led by chieftain Brennus, marched onward and sacked Rome itself, an unparalleled disaster that shook Roman confidence. Legend has it that the last defenders held out on the Capitoline Hill until the sacred geese of Juno raised the alarm of a nocturnal Gallic sneak attack. Ultimately, the Romans agreed to pay a hefty ransom of 1,000 pounds of gold to make the Gauls withdraw. According to lore, when the Romans complained that the Gauls were using rigged weights for the gold, Brennus threw his sword on the scales and uttered, "Vae victis," woe to the vanquished. The humiliation of 390 BC seared itself into Rome's memory. Chastened but determined, the Romans rebuilt their burned city and reformed their army. They constructed the Servian defensive walls around Rome and would never again be caught so unprepared. Indeed, Rome came back stronger. Over the 4th century BC, the Republic fought a series of hard wars to dominate the Italian peninsula. They battled their former overlords, the Etruscans, defeated rival Latin cities, and subjugated the rugged highland tribes of the Apennines like the Sabines and Samnites. Tenacious and resilient, Rome extended its citizenship rights to many allies, sometimes half-citizenship or Latin rights, steadily binding Italy together under its leadership. By roughly 275 BC, after victory in the Pyrrhic War against King Pyrrhus of Epirus, whose war elephants terrified the Romans until they learned how to counter them, Rome was the unchallenged master of Italy. Every crisis seemed only to strengthen Rome's institutions and fighting spirit. The defeat by the Gauls taught them prudence and the value of military discipline. The concept of the citizen soldier became ingrained. Roman farmers would drop their plows, take up arms in legions, and return to their fields victorious, or be stoically mourned if fallen. The Romans also showed a remarkable ability to absorb conquered peoples. Instead of crushing them completely, Rome often offered varying degrees of alliance or citizenship, creating a patchwork of loyal Italian allies. By the start of the 3rd century BC, the stage was set for Rome to step beyond Italy onto a wider Mediterranean arena, and to face a new, formidable adversary that would test the Republic's mettle like never before. Chapter 3. Carthage and the Punic Wars. Rise to superpower. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BC, was a protracted contest largely fought at sea around Sicily. Initially, Rome had almost no navy, being a land power. But demonstrating their ingenuity and tenacity, the Romans built a fleet from scratch. Legend says they modeled their warships after a wrecked Carthaginian galley that washed ashore. They even invented a device called the corvus, a boarding plank with a spike, to turn naval fights into infantry battles by grappling enemy ships. After over 20 years of back-and-forth fighting, including the Romans' horrific loss of a fleet in a storm, Rome emerged victorious, capturing Sicily, Rome's first overseas province, and forcing Carthage to pay a large indemnity. It was a hard-won victory that showed Rome's determination. As a Carthaginian statesman observed, Rome would fight on land and sea and even on water if we could find any, rather than concede defeat. It was the Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BC, however, that became the stuff of legend and nearly brought Rome to its knees. The Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca, one of history's great military commanders, swore eternal hatred of Rome. In 218 BC, Hannibal audaciously led a multinational army, including his famous war elephants, from Spain over the snowy Alps into Italy, catching the Romans utterly off guard. Thus began a 16-year rampage on the Italian soil. Hannibal's crossing of the Alps, braving precipices and alpine blizzards with elephants in tow, remains one of antiquity's most celebrated feats of generalship. The Romans were stunned to find a foreign army in Italy from the north. Many of Rome's Italian allies wavered or defected to Hannibal's side in fear of his seemingly invincible forces. Marble bust often identified as Hannibal, the brilliant Carthaginian general who posed the gravest threat Rome had ever faced. In the Second Punic War, Hannibal led his army, with dozens of war elephants, over the Alps into Italy, catching Rome by surprise. He won spectacular battles, including the massacre at Cannae in 216 BC, where his encircling tactics annihilated a Roman army. Although Hannibal could not capture the city of Rome itself, his campaign ravaged the Italian peninsula for years and made him legendary as the one enemy the Romans feared most. Hannibal won a series of spectacular victories. At the Battle of the Trebia, 218 BC, he ambushed and enveloped a Roman army in the icy river waters. The next year, in 217 BC, he trapped another Roman force in the mist at Lake Trasimene and destroyed it, slaying the consul Flaminius. But his greatest triumph came in 216 BC at the Battle of Cannae in southeastern Italy. There, Hannibal, though outnumbered, executed a double envelopment maneuver so brilliant that it is still studied in military academies. His troops encircled and butchered a Roman army of perhaps 70,000, one of the worst defeats in Roman history. The Romans were terror-stricken. Many expected Hannibal to march on Rome itself. "Hannibal at portas," "Hannibal is at the gates," became a fearful Roman proverb. Yet, in one of those turning points on which history hinges, Hannibal did not attack the city of Rome, lacking siege engines and perhaps hoping Roman allies would defect en masse. Most did not. Rome, reeling but unbowed, refused to surrender. Instead, under the steady leadership of survivors like Fabius Cunctator, the Delayer, the Romans adopted avoiding pitched battles with Hannibal, a war of attrition. They gradually rebuilt their legions and struck at Carthaginian possessions elsewhere. Eventually, a talented Roman general, Publius Cornelius Scipio, took the fight to Hannibal's home base. In 204 BC, Scipio landed in North Africa, forcing Carthage to recall Hannibal from Italy to defend the homeland. At the Battle of Zama, 202 BC on North African soil, Scipio decisively defeated Hannibal, thanks in part to superior cavalry, and learned tactics to neutralize Hannibal's elephants. Carthage sued for peace. The Second Punic War thus ended with Rome victorious, but at tremendous cost. Rome had nearly been annihilated. In the end, sheer grit and strategic adaptability saw them through. For his triumph, Scipio earned the surname Africanus, and Rome imposed harsh terms. Carthage had to surrender its fleet, pay a huge indemnity, and could not wage war without Roman permission. Carthage, though defeated, remained a commercial center, which vexed many Romans who remembered the close call of Hannibal's war. Over the next decades, Roman hawks like the statesman Cato the Elder ended every speech with the phrase, "Carthago delenda est," Carthage must be destroyed. Finally, in the Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BC, the Romans provoked a conflict and besieged Carthage itself. After a bitter siege, Carthage was captured in 146 BC and utterly destroyed. Its walls torn down, its people sold into slavery, and its territory annexed as the Roman province of Africa. The dramatic tale that the Romans sowed Carthage's ground with salt is apocryphal, a later invention, but it symbolizes the complete annihilation. In the same fateful year, 146 BC, Rome also defeated the Greek city of Corinth and dissolved Macedonian resistance in the eastern Mediterranean. The year 146 BC thus stands as a pivotal moment. With Carthage and Corinth's fall, Rome became the dominant power of the Mediterranean world. Mare Nostrum, our sea, the Romans would call it. Emerging from the Punic Wars, Rome was transformed. The long wars brought enormous territorial gains. Spain, North Africa, Greece, and parts of Asia Minor eventually fell under Roman sway. Victorious generals brought back vast riches and throngs of slaves, which disrupted the old agrarian social order. The Roman Republic now governed an empire, but its old political system, designed for a small city-state, struggled to cope with the demands of imperial administration. Social and economic tensions mounted in the aftermath of conquest, even as Rome's power and prestige soared. The next chapters of Roman history would witness internal turmoil as fierce as any foreign war, as Romans grappled with the spoils and stresses of their newfound supremacy. Chapter 4. The Late Republic. Triumph and Turmoil. In the century after the Punic Wars, Rome reached new heights of glory even as the foundations of the Republic began to crack. The Mediterranean empire Rome acquired brought fabulous wealth to the Roman elite. Victorious generals paraded in triumph through the streets, their legions marching behind wagon loads of plunder and chained captives. Provinces like Macedonia, Greece, Pergamum in Asia Minor bequeathed to Rome in 133 BC, and parts of Gaul swelled Rome's dominion. By around 120 BC, the Republic truly spanned from Spain to Asia. Yet this imperial success had unintended consequences: stark economic inequality, corruption, and class conflict. The Republic's political system came under strain as ambitious individuals vied for power and reforms. The warning signs were evident by the time of the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, in the late 2nd century BC. They were tribunes of the plebs who attempted sweeping social reforms, particularly land redistribution to help displaced small farmers. Tiberius Gracchus in 133 BC bypassed the Senate to pass a land law, enraging the conservative elite. He was beaten to death on the Capitol by senators, the first political murder in Republican history. A decade later, his brother Gaius met a similar fate, driven to suicide in 121 BC amid violent suppression of his supporters. The assassination of Tiberius Gracchus in 133 BC marked a turning point, the beginning of the Republic's internal crisis, as later historians noted. Never before had blood spilled in the Forum over policy disputes. The taboos against political violence were eroding. The Gracchian crisis exposed deep divisions: wealthy senators versus impoverished citizens, Italians allied to Rome demanding citizenship rights, and a military increasingly filled with landless poor who felt little stake in the state. After the Gracchi, a period of escalating turmoil ensued, often referred to by scholars as the Roman Revolution or the Crisis of the Republic, 133 to 44 BC. Ambitious generals realized they could leverage their armies and popularity against the Senate. The first to do so was Gaius Marius, a commoner-turned-general who reformed the army around 107 BC by recruiting landless volunteers and promising them land bounties. Marius's military reforms made soldiers more loyal to their general than to the Republic, a dangerous development. Marius, a hero for defeating North African foes and Germanic invaders, was elected consul an unprecedented 7 times. But his rivalry with an aristocratic general, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, plunged Rome into its first civil war. Sulla marched his legions into Rome, shockingly Roman on Roman, and in 82 BC seized the city, declaring himself dictator. He carried out bloody prescriptions, lists of enemies to be killed, to restore senatorial control. Though Sulla eventually stepped down, the precedent was set: generals using armies to grab power. The Republic's norms were crumbling. In the wake of these conflicts came the dramatic episode of Spartacus, a gladiator who led a massive slave rebellion in 73 to 71 BC known as the Third Servile War. Spartacus and his fellow gladiators escaped their training school and raised a rebel army of tens of thousands of enslaved people, ravaging Italy for 2 years. Eventually, legions under Marcus Crassus, and with Pompey finishing the job, crushed the uprising and crucified 6,000 captured rebels along the Appian Way as a grim warning. Though Spartacus lost, the revolt sent fear through Rome's elite and highlighted the Republic's social tensions. A society built on slavery was a society always fearing the enslaved. By the mid-1st century BC, powerful personalities dominated the scene, eclipsing republican institutions. Pompey the Great, a protege of Sulla, won extraordinary commands and cleared the Mediterranean of pirates and conquered vast territories in the east, Syria, Judea. Marcus Licinius Crassus, Rome's richest man, who had defeated Spartacus, and Julius Caesar, an ambitious populist politician with a legendary lineage, formed with Pompey the informal First Triumvirate around 60 BC to share power and bypass the fractious Senate. Caesar, eager for military glory, secured a command in Gaul, modern France, and there he spent the 50s BC conducting a brilliant and brutal conquest. He extended Roman dominion to the Atlantic and even bridged the Rhine and invaded Britain. His Gallic wars made him immensely wealthy and popular with his troops, and chronicled by Caesar himself in his famous commentaries. By 50 BC, however, the alliance with Pompey had collapsed, especially after Crassus's death fighting the Parthians. The Senate, backing Pompey, ordered Caesar to relinquish his command and return to Rome. In January of 49 BC, Caesar instead made a fateful decision. He crossed the Rubicon River, the boundary of his province, with his army, declaring, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast. By bringing his troops into Italy, Caesar effectively declared civil war on the Republic, an irreversible step often seen as the point of no return for Roman freedom. Pompey and the senatorial elite fled Italy as Caesar marched on Rome. Over the next few years, Caesar's forces pursued Pompey from Greece to Egypt to Africa and Spain. Pompey met defeat at Pharsalus in Greece, 48 BC, and was assassinated in Egypt. By 45 BC, Julius Caesar stood as the unrivaled strongman of the Roman world. Chapter 5. The Fall of the Republic. Caesar and Augustus. In the wake of his victory, Julius Caesar assumed supreme power. The Senate made him dictator, first for 10 years and then dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. He enacted many reforms. He restructured debts, expanded the Senate, including provincials, founded new colonies for veterans and the poor, and reformed the calendar into the Julian calendar. With 365 days and leap years, basis of the calendar we use today. Yet, to some Romans, Caesar's dominance smacked of kingship, a betrayal of the Republic's core ideals. Rumors swirled that he even aspired to be king. At one public festival, Mark Antony offered him a diadem, which Caesar refused, but the damage was done. Thus, on the Ides of March 15th, 44 BC, a group of senators conspired to eliminate Caesar and restore the Republic. In a dramatic scene in Pompey's theater, Julius Caesar was stabbed to death by about 60 conspirators, including his friend Brutus and co-conspirator Cassius. Caesar fell at the base of Pompey's statue, reportedly gasping, "Et tu, Brute?" "You too, Brutus?" in Shakespeare's immortalized version. The assassins believed they had saved the Republic. In reality, Caesar's murder triggered the final collapse of the Republic. Rome was plunged into a new round of civil wars as Caesar's allies sought to avenge him and seize power themselves. The result was not a restored republic, but the dawn of a new political order under Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian. Marble bust of Julius Caesar, believed to have been made during his lifetime, the Tusculum portrait circa 50 to 40 BC, Caesar's extraordinary concentration of power as dictator for life, ended the Roman Republic's centuries-old tradition of shared governance. His assassination on the Ides of March 44 BC by a group of senators who feared he aimed to be king plunged Rome into further turmoil. In the ensuing chaos, Caesar's grandnephew Octavian emerged to found the Roman Empire as its first emperor. After Caesar's assassination, Rome was again in chaos. In 43 BC, Caesar's right-hand man, Mark Antony, his grandnephew and adopted son Octavian, just 19 years old, and the general Lepidus formed the Second Triumvirate, a formal three-man dictatorship, to defeat Caesar's assassins. They drew up terrifying prescriptions, executing hundreds of enemies, including the orator Cicero. In 42 BC, at the Battle of Philippi in Greece, Antony and Octavian defeated Brutus and Cassius, who each committed suicide. The triumvirs then carved up the Roman world. Antony took the wealthy east, Octavian the west, Lepidus Africa. Before long, Lepidus was sidelined, and Antony's alliance with the alluring Egyptian queen Cleopatra VII, a partner and later mother to some of his children, estranged him from Octavian. Propaganda in Rome painted Antony as corrupted by an Eastern queen, abandoning his Roman wife, Octavian's sister, and enslaving himself to Cleopatra. The stage was set for a final showdown. In 31 BC, Octavian's fleet under his talented admiral Agrippa met Antony and Cleopatra's forces at the Battle of Actium off the coast of Greece. Octavian won a decisive victory. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt, where, cornered by Octavian's advancing forces, they each committed suicide in 30 BC. Cleopatra famously by the bite of an asp, according to lore. Octavian, at age 32, was left the sole master of the Roman world. The civil wars were over at last. In 27 BC, Octavian ceremonially restored power to the Senate and people of Rome, but in truth he retained supreme authority. The Senate granted him the honorific title Augustus, meaning revered one. Historians mark this as the beginning of the Roman Empire under one-man rule, even though Romans of the time still spoke of the Republic. Augustus cleverly kept republican forms, calling himself princeps, first citizen, rather than king or dictator, while holding all key powers behind the scenes. He became the first Roman emperor, though he never called himself that. He was consul, tribune, princeps, imperator, commander, all at once. The age of Augustus had begun. Chapter 6. Augustus and the Pax Romana. Rome's Golden Age. Augustus' rise ushered in a period of remarkable stability and prosperity known as the Pax Romana, Roman peace. From 27 BC to about AD 180, the empire enjoyed an unprecedented era of internal peace, economic flourishing, and imperial grandeur. Augustus reigned for over 40 years, until AD 14, bringing much-needed calm after the storms of civil war. He famously boasted, "I found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble." Indeed, Augustus undertook vast building projects, temples, forums, theaters, roads, beautifying the capital and solidifying his legacy. He also shrank the army and settled veterans in colonies, secured Rome's frontiers, and fostered a renewal of traditional Roman religion and morals, encouraging marriage and childbearing, penalizing adultery, even exiling his own daughter Julia for scandalous behavior to set an example. Under Augustus's shrewd governance, the empire's frontiers were consolidated. In the north, Roman legions pushed into Hispania, Spain, and Gaul, France, to the Rhine and Danube rivers, and briefly into Germanic lands until a disastrous ambush in the Teutoburg Forest, AD 9, halted expansion in that direction. In the east, Augustus preferred diplomacy, treating with Parthia rather than risking another Crassus-style defeat. The empire was knit together by a network of Roman roads so efficient that a popular saying arose, "All roads lead to Rome." These paved highways facilitated trade and the swift movement of legions, contributing to the economic and cultural unity of the empire. Marble statue of Emperor Augustus, the Prima Porta Augustus, 1st century AD, projecting the image of a youthful, conquering leader. Augustus, formerly Octavian, became Rome's first emperor in 27 BC, ending a century of civil strife. Under his rule began the Pax Romana, a roughly 200-year period of relative peace and prosperity, during which the Roman Empire reached the height of its power. In this statue, Augustus is shown in idealized form as commander-in-chief, with Cupid by his leg hinting at his claimed descent from the goddess Venus. The Pax Romana saw a booming economy, peace and good roads allowed commerce to flow freely from one end of the empire to the other. Spanish olive oil and wine, Egyptian grain, Indian spices, Chinese silk along the distant Silk Road. Roman law spread and was harmonized across provinces. Many emperors to come, like Trajan or Marcus Aurelius, would issue edicts and legal rulings that gradually formed a body of Roman law which remains a foundation of modern legal systems. Latin, and in the eastern half Greek, served as lingua franca. Art and literature flourished. Virgil wrote the epic Aeneid under Augustus's patronage, linking Rome's founding to the heroic saga of Troy. Ovid, Horace, and Livy penned works that shaped Western literature and historical consciousness. After Augustus died, peacefully in his bed, a rarity for those who remembered the violent fates of so many Roman leaders, power passed to his adopted son Tiberius. Thus began the Julio-Claudian dynasty, the family of Julius Caesar and Augustus. Not all of Augustus's successors were as virtuous or capable. Tiberius was dour and efficient, but eventually became reclusive and suspicious. His successor Caligula, AD 37 to 41, started off well but soon descended into madness and cruelty, declaring himself a living god and allegedly planning to make his horse a consul. Caligula was assassinated by his own guards. Next came Claudius, Caligula's uncle, a scholarly but shrewd man who, despite physical infirmities, ruled effectively. He expanded the empire further, most notably conquering Britain in AD 43, and improved bureaucracy by employing freedmen. Claudius, however, was poisoned, perhaps by his wife Agrippina. The last Julio-Claudian was Nero, AD 54 to 68, infamous for extravagance and neglect of state affairs. In AD 64, when a great fire ravaged Rome for 9 days, rumor blamed Nero for fiddling while the city burned. The story of him playing the lyre as flames raged is apocryphal but enduring. Nero, in turn, shifted blame onto the nascent sect of Christians. Instigating the first imperial persecution of Christians, many were cruelly executed in Nero's gardens. Eventually, generals in the provinces revolted against Nero's misrule. Facing certain overthrow, Nero committed suicide in AD 68, lamenting, "What an artist dies in me." With Nero's death, the Julio-Claudian line ended, plunging Rome into a brief civil war known as the Year of the Four Emperors, 69 AD, as rival claimants Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian battled for power. Vespasian, a no-nonsense general, founded the Flavian dynasty, restoring stability. He and his sons Titus and Domitian ruled from AD 69 to 96. Vespasian is remembered for consolidating finances and beginning construction of the Colosseum, the great amphitheater of Rome opened by his son Titus, where tens of thousands of Romans would later watch gladiator games and spectacles. Titus had a short but memorable reign. During his time, the catastrophic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in AD 79 buried Pompeii and Herculaneum in ash, and a second great fire struck Rome in 80. Titus compassionately aided victims and earned love as the delight of mankind before dying young. Domitian, by contrast, became autocratic and paranoid and was assassinated in 96 AD, but under him and his father, the empire's frontiers held firm. The next century is often seen as the pinnacle of the Roman Empire's prosperity and stability. After Domitian's death, the Senate chose an elderly, childless senator Nerva as emperor, who then began the practice of adopting a capable heir rather than relying on bloodline. Nerva adopted Trajan, a respected general, who became emperor in 98 AD. Trajan proved to be one of Rome's greatest warrior emperors. Under his rule, 98 to 117, the empire reached its maximum territorial extent, conquering Dacia, modern Romania, yielding vast gold mines, and campaigning far into the east against Parthia. The Roman Empire now stretched from the Atlantic to the Caspian Sea, truly a colossal realm encircling the Mediterranean. Trajan built enduring monuments like Trajan's Column, celebrating his Dacian victories with a spiral of intricate carvings. Trajan's successor, his adopted son Hadrian, 117 to 138, shifted focus from expansion to consolidation and cultural flourishing. Hadrian traveled widely across his domain, fortifying frontiers, like building Hadrian's Wall in Britain to mark the empire's northern limit, and investing in architecture. The Pantheon in Rome, with its magnificent dome, dates to his reign. He was a humanist and Philhellene, enamored of Greek culture. Hadrian's adopted successor, Antoninus Pius, 138 to 161, presided over perhaps the most peaceful era of the empire. Nothing much to record, which for Romans was a blessing. The Antonine age continued with Marcus Aurelius, 161 to 180, the philosopher-emperor who authored the Meditations reflecting on duty, stoicism, and virtue amid the burdens of rule. Under Marcus, Rome did face renewed warfare on the frontiers, particularly the Marcomannic Wars on the Danube, and the outbreak of a devastating plague, likely smallpox, the Antonine Plague, that killed millions and weakened the empire's economy. Marcus Aurelius, last of the so-called five good emperors, died in 180 AD, notably breaking the adoption precedent by leaving power to his biological son Commodus. Many historians view the end of Marcus's reign as the close of Rome's golden era. Indeed, Commodus, Emperor 180 to 192, proved to be a degenerate, egotistical ruler, more interested in pretending to be a gladiator in the arena than governing. His reign's instability foreshadowed troubles to come. Commodus was assassinated, strangled by a wrestler in his bath, on New Year's Eve 192, sparking another brief civil war. Although order was restored by Septimius Severus, 1933 to 211, the Severan dynasty that followed grappled with mounting problems: court intrigues, a bloated army budget, and signs of economic strain. Severus told his sons on his deathbed, "Enrich the soldiers and scorn all others." After the murder of Severus's vicious son Caracalla in 217, who is remembered for granting Roman citizenship to virtually all free inhabitants of the empire in 212, and for slaying his own brother in front of their mother, the empire drifted, increasingly dependent on the army's support for each new emperor. Chapter 7. Crisis and Recovery. The 3rd Century Storm. The 3rd century AD brought stormy times that nearly caused the collapse of the Roman Empire. From 235 to 284 AD, a period known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century, Rome was beset by a perfect storm of calamities: ferocious foreign invasions, constant civil wars, plagues, and economic breakdown. Emperors rose and fell with dizzying speed, most meeting violent ends. In one 50-year span, over 20 men would claim the title of emperor, often several at once in different regions. These short-lived rulers are sometimes called the barracks emperors because many were army officers raised to power by their legions. The unity of the empire frayed. At one point in the 260s, a breakaway Gallic empire formed in the west and an independent Palmyrene kingdom in the east, as central authority disintegrated. Externally, Rome's long secure frontiers were breached by new enemies. In the east, the old Parthian kingdom was replaced by the aggressive Sassanid Persian Empire, which inflicted humiliating defeats, capturing even Emperor Valerian alive in 260. Legend says the Persian king Shapur used Valerian as a human footstool. On the northern frontiers, Germanic tribes, Goths, Franks, Alemanni, and others, pushed across the Rhine-Danube lines in massive incursions, even reaching as far as Greece and Spain in destructive raids. Meanwhile, the empire's heartland was racked by economic crisis. Endless civil wars had drained the treasury, debased coinage led to hyperinflation, banditry increased, and a devastating plague, possibly a resurgence of smallpox or measles, decimated the population. Never, wrote a contemporary, had the world been shaken by so many misfortunes all at once. Yet remarkably, Rome did not fall. The mid-3rd century saw soldier emperors of talent fight back. In 268 to 270, the tough general Claudius Gothicus defeated a huge Gothic invasion, earning his name by the victory, and his successor Aurelian, 270 to 275, earned the title Restitutor Orbis, Restorer of the World, by reconquering the breakaway Gallic and Palmyrene empires and shoring up frontiers. He even built a new set of stout Aurelian walls around Rome, many of which still stand. The worst of the barbarian onslaughts were repelled. However, stability remained elusive with rapid turnovers of rulers until a towering figure emerged. Diocletian, who took power in 284 AD and ruled for 2 decades. Diocletian was a formidable organizer and reformer. Recognizing that one man alone could no longer manage the sprawling empire and its crises, he took the radical step of establishing a tetrarchy, rule of 4. He appointed a co-emperor, Maximian, and 2 junior sub-emperors, Galerius and Constantius, each responsible for a quarter of the empire. East and West had separate courts. Diocletian himself ruled the eastern half, from Nicomedia near Byzantium, while Maximian took the west, from Milan. This power sharing was meant to ensure smoother successions and rapid response to threats across multiple frontiers. To further stabilize the realm, Diocletian restructured provincial administration, doubling the number of provinces to reduce any one governor's power, and grouping them into dioceses. He massively enlarged the bureaucracy and army, introducing more regimented control of society. Diocletian also implemented sweeping economic reforms, most famously issuing an edict on maximum prices to curb rampant inflation, setting price caps on goods and wages, though this largely failed and was widely evaded. He tied peasants legally to their farmlands and made occupations hereditary to secure tax collection and production. He fortified the frontiers and secured the empire's borders, winning victories over invading Sarmatians and Alemanni, and even concluding a favorable peace with the aggressive Persian Empire. By the end of Diocletian's reign, the empire's situation had markedly improved. The frontiers were stabilized, the economy somewhat recuperated, and the machinery of government made more efficient for an empire of such vast scale. It's often said that Diocletian saved the Roman Empire from total collapse, enabling it to endure for many more centuries, in the East for over a millennium more. In 305 AD, in an astonishing move rarely seen among monarchs, Diocletian voluntarily abdicated, retiring to his palace and cabbage gardens in Split on the Dalmatian coast. He compelled his co-emperor Maximian to do the same, allowing the juniors, Galerius and Constantius, to step up. However, the tetrarchic succession did not go smoothly for long. Rival claims soon led to civil wars, as Diocletian's system lacked an agreed mechanism once the original tetrarchs were gone. Out of the turmoil emerged Constantine, son of Constantius, who would go on to reshape Rome in profound ways. Chapter 8. Constantine and the New Rome, the Christian Empire. Constantine the Great took power in stages after a series of battles against rival emperors, culminating in his victory at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD at Rome. On the eve of that battle, Constantine famously experienced a vision or dream. According to Christian sources, he saw a cross of light in the sky and heard, "In this sign conquer." He had his soldiers paint the Chi Rho, the monogram of Christ, on their shields, and won the battle. Whether through divine providence or battlefield acumen, Constantine became the sole ruler in the West, and by 324 AD, he defeated the Eastern Emperor Licinius, reuniting the empire under one ruler again. Constantine's reign, 306 to 337 AD, marked a decisive turning point. He became the first Roman emperor to embrace Christianity, which would transform the Roman Empire and eventually much of Europe. In 313 AD, Constantine and Licinius jointly issued the Edict of Milan, officially legalizing Christianity and granting religious freedom throughout the empire. The age of persecuting Christians, which had last flared under Diocletian's Great Persecution, 303 to 311 AD, the empire's final attempt to suppress the new faith, was definitively over. Constantine went further. He favored the church with imperial patronage, convened the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD to address doctrinal disputes, producing the Nicene Creed, built great churches, like the original St. Peter's Basilica in Rome and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, and gradually filled high offices with Christians. While he wasn't baptized until on his deathbed, and historical debate continues on how fully he understood his new faith, Constantine's rule firmly set the empire on a Christian course. For this, he is venerated as Saint Constantine in Eastern Christianity. Just as momentous was Constantine's decision to found a new capital in the East. In 324 AD, he selected the old Greek town of Byzantium on the Bosporus Strait as the site for Nova Roma, New Rome, soon to be called Constantinople, city of Constantine. He inaugurated it in 330 AD with grand ceremony. Constantinople's location was strategic, at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, commanding the routes between the Aegean and Black Seas, and well placed to respond to threats on the eastern frontiers. The city was magnificently endowed with forums, palaces, and churches. It would quickly grow to rival and eventually eclipse the old Rome in importance. Indeed, Constantinople would remain the capital of the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire for over 1,000 years. Constantine's shift of focus to the east presaged the coming divergence of the empire into eastern and western halves. Constantine's heirs contended for power, and the 4th century saw further trials. Notably, under Emperor Julian the Apostate, ruler. 361 to 363, a brief attempt was made to roll back Christianization and restore pagan worship, but it failed. Julian died campaigning against the Persians. The empire also faced new barbarian pressures. In 376 AD, masses of Goths, fleeing the terrifying nomadic Huns from the steppes, were permitted to cross the Danube into Roman territory as refugees. Misrule and mistreatment of these Gothic refugees led them to rebel, and in 378 AD came the shattering Battle of Adrianople in Thrace. The Eastern Emperor Valens rashly engaged the Gothic cavalry and was defeated and killed. Adrianople was a military disaster on par with Cannae. 2/3 of the Eastern Roman army was destroyed, and it revealed Roman vulnerability to the barbarian peoples beyond the frontier. Shocked by this defeat, the Romans under Theodosius I eventually made peace with the Goths, settling them as autonomous allies, foederati, within the empire. A significant precedent where barbarians lived under their own leaders on Roman soil. Theodosius I, Emperor 379 to 395, was the last to rule both East and West together. A fervent Christian, he made Nicene Christianity the official state religion and banned pagan cults by the end of the 4th century. Upon his death in 395 AD, he split the administration between his young sons, Arcadius in the east, based in Constantinople, and Honorius in the west, with his capital at Ravenna. This division hardened into permanence. The empire would never again be reunified for long. The Western Roman Empire and Eastern Roman Empire, which we later call the Byzantine Empire, would follow separate destinies. The Eastern Empire, wealthier and more urbanized, survived the coming centuries. The Western Empire, weaker and facing the main brunt of barbarian migrations, would soon crumble. Chapter 9. The Fall of the Western Empire. Twilight of an Era. In the 5th century AD, the Western Roman Empire spiraled into terminal decline amid relentless barbarian invasions and internal decay. Whole Germanic tribes, pressured by the ferocious Huns, moved into Roman territories en masse. In 406 AD, a freezing of the Rhine River allowed hordes of Vandals, Alans, and Suebi to cross into Gaul. They rampaged and eventually passed into Spain and North Africa. The imperial government, too feeble to expel them, could only watch its provinces slip away. In Italy, the imperial court relied on powerful barbarian general warlords like Stilicho, a half-Vandal who defended Italy against multiple invasions, to hold the line. But when Stilicho was executed in a palace intrigue in 408, the floodgates opened. In 410 AD, the unthinkable happened. Rome was sacked by the Visigoths under their king Alaric I. For 3 days, Alaric's Goths looted the Eternal City, the first time in nearly 800 years that Rome had fallen to a foreign enemy. Though the Goths, who were Arian Christians, showed some restraint, churches like St. Peter's were reportedly spared, and there was relatively little bloodshed compared to ancient atrocities. The psychological blow was immense. The city which had taken the whole world, wrote St. Jerome in despair, was itself taken. Many Romans could not fathom it. Some blamed the abandonment of the old pagan gods, prompting St. Augustine to write The City of God to explain the disaster in a Christian context. The sack of Rome in 410 AD shocked the Mediterranean world, symbolizing to all that the Western Empire was failing. After wandering, Alaric's Visigoths moved to Gaul and Spain, eventually settling in Gaul as federates and later forming the Visigothic kingdom. Meanwhile, another blow struck. In 455 AD, the Vandals, who had established a kingdom in North Africa, severing Rome's grain supply, sailed to Italy and sacked Rome a second time. This Vandal sack, 455, lasted an excruciating 2 weeks of plunder. Though accounts suggest the Vandals were methodical in looting rather than wantonly burning, giving rise to the modern term vandalism, they stripped Rome of countless treasures, even carrying off the great bronze roof tiles of the Temple of Jupiter. The once mighty imperial city was now repeatedly at the mercy of barbarians. The Western emperors by this time were mostly figureheads, propped up or deposed at will by powerful Germanic generals who really pulled the strings. One such general was Ricimer, a half-Suebi warlord who dominated politics in the mid-5th century, making and breaking puppet emperors. Another was Orestes, a Roman general of barbarian origin, who in 475 AD placed his own young son Romulus Augustulus on the throne in Ravenna. This boy would become known to history, somewhat poetically, as the last Roman emperor of the West. His very name, Romulus Augustulus, harkened back to Rome's founder and its first emperor. In 476 AD, Orestes was challenged by his federate mercenary commander, Odoacer, a chieftain of the Siri, a Germanic tribe. Odoacer's troops, largely Germanic foederati who had not been granted lands they were promised, mutinied. They killed Orestes and marched on Ravenna. Facing the inevitable, the teenage Romulus Augustulus abdicated on September 4th, 476, yielding the imperial regalia to Odoacer. Odoacer, rather than take a lofty new title, simply declared himself ruler of Italy, eventually king of Italy, and sent the Western imperial insignia to the Eastern emperor in Constantinople, suggesting one emperor was enough. Thus, in 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire officially came to an end, at least by the conventional date. Roman rule persisted in name in some regions a little longer, the Soissons domain in Gaul until 486, for example, and Roman culture and the Latin language continued within the new Germanic kingdoms that took its place. But no new Western Roman emperor would be recognized after 476. The imperial throne in the West was left vacant. To contemporaries, this transition was scarcely noticed as a singular event. They saw it as just another power shuffle in a troubled era. Only later did historians pinpoint 476 as a watershed moment. The fall of Western Rome. A millennium of Roman dominance in the West had ended. The Eastern Roman Empire, however, lived on. And in time, it would be known as the Byzantine Empire, preserving Roman imperial legacies until 1453 AD. The fall of Western Rome was a complex, gradual process, not a sudden collapse. But its symbolic weight is huge. With the Western Empire gone, Western Europe entered a fragmented early medieval period of smaller barbarian kingdoms: Visigoths in Spain, Franks in Gaul, Ostrogoths, then Lombards in Italy, Vandals in Africa, etc. Yet those kingdoms, even as they were governed by Germanic rulers, in many ways continued Roman administration, law, and culture, seeing themselves as inheritors, not destroyers, of Rome. In the East, emperors like Justinian, 527 to 565, would even try to reconquer the lost western provinces. Justinian briefly retook North Africa and Italy in the 6th century, albeit at great cost. But the ancient city of Rome itself, once the capital of the world, declined into a secondary city. Its population shrinking, its monuments crumbling or quarried for stone, even as the papacy in Rome rose as a new kind of power, the Bishop of Rome gaining influence as the Western secular authority waned. And so, the ancient Roman era drew to a close. From a mythical twin raised by a wolf, to a band of proud republicans, to world-conquering legions and brilliant emperors, to a besieged remnant giving way to successor realms. The saga of Rome had played out over more than 1,200 years. But in many profound ways, Rome never truly died. Its eastern half endured another 1,000 years. Its legacy permeated the emerging medieval world and beyond. As one chapter closed, another opened, in which the memory and influence of Rome would guide new civilizations. Chapter 10. Legacy of Ancient Rome. The Eternal Influence. Though the political power of ancient Rome fell in the West, the influence of Roman civilization on world history has been monumental and enduring. Rome's legacy is deeply embedded in the art, architecture, language, law, and government of later ages. Even today, we walk under arches designed by Roman engineers, speak languages derived from Latin, and live under legal codes inspired by Roman law. Few empires have left such a broad and lasting mark on humanity. Language and literature. The Latin language of the Romans gave rise to the Romance languages: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, and others, spoken by hundreds of millions today. Countless English words are based on Latin roots as well. The Latin alphabet is the foundation of the English alphabet and many others. Moreover, Rome's writers have never ceased to inspire. From Virgil's Aeneid to Ovid's Metamorphoses to the orations of Cicero and histories of Livy and Tacitus, Roman literature shaped the literary canons of the West. Medieval monks copied these works. Renaissance scholars studied them, and they continue to be read in schools, keeping the voice of Rome alive. Law and government. Rome's greatest institutional legacy may be in the realm of law. Roman law, especially as codified under later emperors like Justinian, formed the basis of many modern legal systems. Concepts like trial by jury, civil rights, contracts, personal property, legal wills, and testament all owe a debt to Roman jurisprudence. The very idea of a republican form of government, with elected representatives and checks and balances, traces back to the Roman Republic's example. The United States Senate, for instance, deliberately echoes the name and some practices of the Roman Senatus. The Western justice system also borrowed from Roman courtroom procedures, e.g., preliminary hearings, the presentation of evidence and witnesses. Roman ideas of civic virtue and mixed government influenced the framing of many modern constitutions. Engineering and architecture. The Romans were master builders. They pioneered durable construction techniques like the use of concrete, which allowed them to create vast arches, vaults, and domes, structures that still stand after 2,000 years. The Pantheon in Rome, with its unreinforced concrete dome, the largest in the world until modern times, attests to their skill. They built aqueducts that carried clean water to cities over many miles, using precise gradients. Some are still functional today. They laid out a network of roads, over 50,000 miles, so well built that many form the basis of highways now. Indeed, some old Roman roads in Europe are still in use. As the saying went, all roads lead to Rome, reflecting how thoroughly they connected their world. Roman amphitheaters, baths, and arenas, like the Colosseum, became templates for modern stadiums and public buildings. The very sports stadiums we use today, with their oval shape and tiered seating, derive from the Roman amphitheater design. In architecture, neoclassical styles explicitly imitate Roman and Greek forms. One need only look at the Capitol building in Washington or the Arc de Triomphe in Paris to see Roman arches and columns reborn. Art and culture. Roman sculpture and art spread classical forms far and wide. Renaissance artists learned anatomy and realism in part by studying Roman statuary, which often were copies of Greek masterpieces. The Romans also acted as transmitters, preserving and spreading the heritage of ancient Greece. By conquering Greece, Rome ironically ensured Greek art, drama, philosophy, and science would flourish anew and merge into a Greco-Roman classical tradition that underpins Western culture. Additionally, Roman mosaics, frescoes, like those preserved at Pompeii, glassware, and pottery have influenced decorative arts through the ages. The Latin classics fed the intellectual development of Europe. For centuries, to be educated meant to know Latin and read the likes of Virgil and Cicero. Religion. Perhaps Rome's most profound legacy is the spread of Christianity. What began as a small persecuted sect in a backwater province grew, aided paradoxically by the empire's own networks, into the dominant religion of the Roman Empire by the late 4th century. The Roman Catholic Church, centered in Rome and headed by the Pope, originally the Bishop of Rome, became a central institution of medieval Europe, preserving literacy and learning after the empire's fall. The Byzantine, Eastern Roman Empire carried on a Christian Roman culture for centuries, influencing the Orthodox Christian world. Christian moral and ethical views, disseminated under Rome's aegis, became a bedrock of Western civilization's values. Civilization and urbanization. The very concept of urban living in Europe has Roman fingerprints. The English word city derives from Latin civitas, originally meaning the civic body of citizens. The Romans planted cities, often as colonies for veterans, across their empire, many of which became today's great cities: London, Londinium, Paris, Lutetia, Vienna, Vindobona, Cologne, Colonia Agrippina, York, Eboracum, and countless others trace their origins to Roman forts or towns. In these settlements, they introduced urban amenities like paved streets, sewers, bathhouses, forums, marketplaces, and theaters, templates for European towns later. The idea of a centralized municipal administration, town councils, curia, and city services goes back to Roman practices. In short, Rome's cultural DNA runs through the blood of subsequent generations. As National Geographic aptly summarized, even thousands of years later, we can still see evidence of Rome in our art, architecture, technology, literature, language, and law. From bridges and stadiums to books and the words we hear every day, the ancient Romans have left their mark on our world. The legacy survived the empire's demise and went on to shape other civilizations, a process which continues to this day. In fact, the very notion of Western civilization is inseparable from the legacy of Rome. Concepts of civil engineering, city planning, republican governance, legal rights, and universal citizenship all owe a great deal to Roman innovations or adaptations. And so, the story of ancient Rome, from a small hilltop village by the Tiber, through kingdom, republic, and imperial glory to collapse, is more than a distant tale of marble ruins and long-dead emperors. It is a living heritage that still enriches our daily lives. Rome's influence on the development of mankind is immense. The spread of classical Greco-Roman thought laid the groundwork for the Renaissance and modern science. Roman law underpins modern legal codes. Latin became the language of learning and shaped our communication. Roman architecture and engineering solutions remain in use, and their ideal of a universal state under law inspired later visions like the European Union. In a sense, the spirit of Rome never fell. It lived on in the titles of medieval kings. Caesar became Kaiser and Czar. In the Holy Roman Empire that fancied itself Rome's successor, in the U.S. Capitol's dome, and in every modern citizen who values the rule of law and the idea of a republic. As we conclude this epic journey through Rome's history, its crucial moments and enduring achievements, we see that the Romans indeed built more than an empire of power. They built an empire of the mind, a cultural commonwealth that would long outlast the eagles of their legions. Their story remains forever fascinating. A dramatic, human tale of ambition, war, political genius, glory, and tragedy that has inspired people for 2 millennia. It is the story of how a city of mud huts became the mistress of the world, and how that world was forever changed by Rome. In the end, we are all heirs of ancient Rome. The laws we abide, the words we speak, the cities we inhabit, the roads we travel, the calendar we use, and the ideals of citizenship and justice we hold dear, all owe something to that marvel of history, Rome, the eternal city.